I speak 6 languages, Your Grace. The girl's words silenced the Duke, who called her unworthy. The Duke's voice cut through the Foreign Office reception like a blade. This is delicate work, not a parlor trick. We require someone suitable. It would be unwise to entrust our reputation to a girl who has merely memorized phrases. Clara Wynter stood frozen, her cheeks burning as dozens of eyes turned toward her. She was nobody a companion to a wealthy widow, wearing her plainest gown among silk and diamonds, surviving on wages that barely kept her family from the streets. But she was not a fool, and she would not be dismissed like one. I speak 6 languages, Your Grace. Her voice came out steady, despite the heat in her face. Fluently. I have translated law texts, medical treatises, and political essays. If that renders me unworthy, perhaps the standards are poorly set. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Edward Blackthorne, Duke of Ashridge, stared at her with cold grey eyes. He was tall, dark-haired, and carried himself with the absolute certainty of a man who'd never been contradicted by someone beneath his station. Before he could respond, a voice spoke from nearby, accented, amused. Count Marek Kovacs, the envoy from a small Central European kingdom, stepped forward and addressed Clara in rapid Hungarian. Clara answered without hesitation, correcting his proverb politely and adding a phrase that made him laugh out loud. The Count turned to Edward, eyes twinkling. If you do not hire this woman, Your Grace, we shall, and we will take our negotiations elsewhere. Edward's jaw tightened. Clara watched him calculate, pride warring with practicality, prejudice battling necessity. The upcoming trade conference required interpreters fluent in French, German, Italian, Russian, and Ottoman Turkish. She'd just proven she could provide what he needed. Very well, his voice was ice. A temporary position. 1 week. You will report to Ashridge House tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp. I accept, Your Grace. Clara met his eyes without flinching. Not for your approval, but to prove you wrong. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd just challenged a duke in public. She'd either saved her family or destroyed herself. Only time would tell which. 1. Clara's lodging house sat in a cramped corner of London, where the fog tasted like coal smoke, and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every crying child, every desperate prayer. She shared a room with 2 other working women and sent every spare penny home. Her mother was ill, confined to a seaside town where the air was cleaner. Her younger brother was apprenticed to a printer, learning a trade that might someday lift him from poverty. Her younger sister worked as a seamstress, fingers perpetually pricked and bandaged. They survived because Clara worked. Because their father, before he died and left them drowning in debt, had given her one gift no creditor could take to languages. She remembered his study shelves overflowing with books in French and German and Italian. Evenings spent reading aloud and translating together, the way his eyes lit up when she mastered a difficult passage. Language is power, Clara, he told her once. The ability to understand what others cannot, to speak when others are silent, that is a weapon no one can steal from you. She'd needed that weapon ever since. The next morning, Clara arrived at Ashridge House precisely at 8. The butler, Mr. Avery, greeted her with polite uncertainty, clearly unsure how to treat an unmarried woman working in the Duke's private study. Miss Wynter. Edward appeared in the doorway of his study, already dressed in immaculate morning clothes. You're punctual, at least. I'm many things, Your Grace. Punctual is the least of them. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he gestured her inside. The study was magnificent dark wood, towering bookshelves, a massive desk covered in papers and correspondence from half the capitals of Europe. "The conference begins in 5 days, Edward said crisply. "Before then, I need to know if your claims were genuine or merely impressive theatre. Test me." He did. For 3 hours, Clara translated letters from French and German, summarized documents, corrected errors in previous translations that everyone else had missed. She worked steadily, professionally, refusing to show how her hands wanted to shake. At one point, Edward attempted a French phrase he'd apparently learned in Paris. The pronunciation was atrocious. Clara hesitated, then gently corrected him. "The emphasis falls on the second syllable, Your Grace. Otherwise, you're saying something rather different than you intend." "And what am I saying?" "That you'd like to purchase the ambassador's grandmother," which would be awkward at a trade conference. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Not quite amusement, but close. "I see." He cleared his throat. "Continue." That afternoon, Clara was organizing papers in the library when she heard a small voice struggling with Italian pronunciation. She followed the sound and found a girl of about 10, dark-haired and serious-faced, frowning at a children's book. "The glee makes a different sound in Italian," Clara said gently, kneeling beside her. "Like this," she demonstrated. The girl, Lady Emily, Edward's niece, Clara learned, later looked up with surprised eyes. "You speak Italian, and French and German and a few others. Would you like me to show you?" They spent 20 minutes turning language into a game, acting out words, making silly sentences. Emily, who Clara gathered was usually nervous around adults, giggled and relaxed. Clara didn't notice Edward watching from the doorway until Emily called out, "Uncle Edward, Miss Wynter is teaching me to say, 'The cat eats breakfast' in Italian." Edward's expression was unreadable. "So I see." That evening, as Clara gathered her things to leave, she overheard Mr. Avery speaking quietly to the Duke. "She's the first person I've seen make Lady Emily forget her shyness in months, Your Grace." A long pause. Then Edward's voice, low and almost reluctant. "She's temporary." Clara slipped out into the fog, pretending she hadn't heard, pretending the words didn't sting. 2. The conference moved to Edward's country estate, a sprawling manor where diplomats, politicians, and foreign envoys gathered for a week of negotiations disguised as a house party. Clara was given a small room near the servants' quarters and instructed to remain invisible unless needed. She quickly learned that invisibility had degrees. To the servants, she was an oddity too educated to be one of them, too poor to be a guest. To the diplomats, she was a useful tool. To the aristocratic ladies, she was something else entirely. "How convenient," Lady Octavia Finch remarked loudly at dinner. "Keeping your dictionary young and pretty, Your Grace." Clara kept her eyes on her plate. She'd survived worse than snide comments from jealous women. Lady Octavia had a daughter of marriageable age and had clearly hoped to secure Edward's attention. A working woman in his study threatened those ambitions. The real test came during the third day's negotiations. The older interpreter from the Foreign Office, a pompous man who'd made it clear he resented Clara's presence, mistranslated a phrase from Count Kovacs's advisor. What should have been adjusting tariffs came out sounding like reneging on your promises. The room erupted. Voices rose. Count Kovacs's face went red. Edward's jaw locked with barely controlled fury. Clara stood at the side, taking notes, her heart pounding. She knew the correct phrasing. She knew exactly what had gone wrong. She also knew that stepping forward uninvited could destroy her, but staying silent would destroy the conference. Clara moved before she could talk herself out of it. "If I may, Your Grace." She addressed the room in the Count's language, calmly explaining the idiom, then rephrased it in English so both sides could save face. There was a small ambiguity in the expression, she concluded smoothly. The Count's position remains as stated in the original documents. The tension dissolved. Count Kovacs nodded, mollified. The negotiations continued. Afterward, in private, Edward found her in the hallway. "Miss Wynter," his voice was quiet, "you saved us from a very expensive misunderstanding today." "I did my job, Your Grace." "No, you did far more than that." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, the ice cracking, just slightly. "I was wrong to call you unworthy. I apologize." Clara stared at him. In her experience, men like Edward Blackthorne didn't apologize, not to women like her. "Why are you so cautious?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "About translators, about trust." Edward was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he told her. Years ago he trusted a charming, well-bred translator who'd misrepresented a crucial clause in a treaty. The result was an international scandal, a ruined alliance, and mockery that still followed Edward through every ballroom in London. "I swore I would never be fooled again," he said quietly. "I told myself my caution was wisdom. Perhaps it was only fear." Clara understood fear. She'd lived with it every day since her father died. "Fear makes us careful," she said, "but it can also make us blind." They stood in the quiet hallway, something fragile and unnamed growing between them. Then voices approached, and the moment shattered. "I should go," Clara said. "Good night, Your Grace." She walked away before he could respond, her heart beating far too fast for a woman who knew better than to hope. 3. The days that followed were strange and wonderful and terrifying. Clara and Edward worked late into the nights, preparing documents, reviewing translations, arguing about phrasing. Their conversations wandered from diplomatic language to literature to philosophy to the absurdity of aristocratic customs. "You genuinely believe bloodlines matter more than ability?" Clara asked one evening, incredulous. "I believe nothing of the sort, but society does, and society's beliefs have consequences." "Then society is wrong." "Yes." Edward's voice was soft. "I'm beginning to think it is." Clara found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. The patience he showed with Emily. The quiet way he revised trade clauses to protect workers, not just wealthy landowners. She was falling in love with him. She knew it, and she knew it was hopeless. At dinner one evening, Count Kovacs publicly praised Clara as the most capable linguist I have met in London. He joked about offering her a position at his court. A young scholar named James Harrow, middle class, earnest, clearly interested in Clara, joined the conversation. He'd studied her father's work and spoke to her about language and translation with genuine enthusiasm. Clara laughed at something James said, her first unguarded laugh in weeks. Across the room, she caught Edward watching them. Something complicated moved through his expression before he looked away. That night, Clara lay awake, thinking about impossible things. Edward was a duke. She was a companion who'd been one missed payment away from destitution. The distance between them couldn't be bridged by late-night conversations and almost smiles. She needed to remember that, before hope destroyed her. 4. Edward began to pull away. Clara noticed it immediately. The careful distance, the formal tone, the way he started praising James Harrow's prospects whenever she was nearby. "Harrow is respectable," Edward remarked one afternoon. "Promising career. He seems quite taken with you." "Does he?" Clara's voice was flat. "A woman in your position should consider such things." She understood what he was saying. What he wasn't saying, He was pushing her toward an appropriate match, a sensible choice. He was being honourable. She wanted to scream. Instead, she threw herself into work, staying professional, staying invisible, pretending her heart wasn't breaking. Then Lady Octavia struck. At a small gathering, she innocently suggested that Clara had been manipulating translations to favour Count Kovacs. Perhaps, Lady Octavia implied, Miss Wynter had been promised a foreign post in exchange for her loyalty. The next day, when a minor misunderstanding arose in negotiations caused by the same incompetent older interpreter, Lady Octavia seized on it as proof. "Can we truly trust someone with divided loyalties?" she asked, eyes wide with false concern. "The Duke should verify Miss Wynter's translations before any further damage is done." All eyes turned to Edward. Clara held her breath. She'd worked flawlessly for days. She'd saved the conference from disaster. Surely he would defend her. Edward's face went carefully blank. "We should review the documents before making any determinations." The words fell like stones into water. He hadn't accused her, but he hadn't defended her either. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. That afternoon, she went to his study and placed her notes on his desk. "I'll complete the week as agreed," she said, her voice steady through sheer willpower. "But I'll resign afterward. Miss Wynter, I will not remain where my integrity is a matter of convenience, Your Grace. My family survives on my name. I cannot have it dragged through salons like a parlor joke. I was trying to be fair." "You were trying to be safe," Clara met his eyes. "I thought you'd learned that fear makes us blind. Apparently, I was wrong." She walked out before he could see her tears. That night, Edward reviewed every document, every translation, every note Clara had ever produced. Her work was flawless. More than flawless, she'd caught errors no one else had seen, prevented disasters no one else had anticipated. The older interpreter, meanwhile, had made multiple mistakes. Further investigation revealed he'd been taking money from a businessman who profited from chaos. Count Kovacs confirmed privately that Clara's intervention had saved the negotiations. He added, with barely concealed contempt, that London's snobbery was embarrassing. Edward sat alone in his study, staring at Clara's empty chair, her neat stack of notes, the space where she should have been. His fear of ridicule had cost him the trust of the most capable, honest person he'd ever known. If he wanted to be worthy of her respect, even if she never forgave him, he had to make this right. 5. The final conference session was packed with diplomats, officials, and curious aristocrats. Lady Octavia sat near the front, looking smug. Edward stood and asked for the room's attention. "Before we conclude," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "I must address a matter of justice." He presented evidence of the older interpreter's mistakes and probable corruption. He showed Clara's meticulous notes and explained how her interventions had prevented a diplomatic catastrophe. Any suggestion that Miss Wynter acted with dishonesty, Edward concluded, was entirely false. She has been indispensable to the success of these negotiations, and I have requested that the Foreign Office offer her an official position as staff linguist and translator. Lady Octavia's face went white. The room buzzed with murmurs. Clara, who had returned only to finish her duties, stood frozen by the door. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected him to defend her so completely, so publicly, at the cost of his own pride. After the session, she found him in the now quiet study. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Edward turned to face her. "Clara, I was a coward. My fear of past humiliation made me hesitate when you needed me most. You had every right to walk away. I did walk away. And I'm asking you to come back." He stepped closer. "Not as an employee, not as a temporary solution." His voice dropped. "You speak 6 languages, Miss Wynter, but the one I needed to learn most was the language of your courage. I called you unworthy because I was afraid I might not be worthy of you." Clara's heart hammered. "You're a duke. I'm a working woman. Society would never—" "Society can adapt or be damned." His eyes held hers. "Clara, I'm not asking you to give up your work or become a decorative duchess. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal. The woman who argues with me in 6 languages and makes me better for it." "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything." Clara thought about her father's study, about the weapon he'd given her that no one could steal. She thought about poverty and fear and the desperate calculation of survival. And she thought about this man, this impossible, infuriating, honourable man who'd publicly staked his reputation to defend a mere companion. "If we marry," she said slowly, "you realise you'll be corrected at dinner parties in at least 4 different tongues." Edward's face broke into a smile, real, unguarded, transforming. "I look forward to it. And I won't give up my work. I wouldn't dream of asking. And your mother will probably hate me." "My mother hates everyone. You'll be in excellent company." Clara laughed, the sound surprising her. "Then yes, Your Grace, I'll marry you." "Edward," he corrected. "My name is Edward." "Edward." She tested it, found it fit. "I suppose I'll have to practice saying that in 6 languages." He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and certain. Clara kissed him back, feeling something she'd almost forgotten was possible: hope. Months later, the Duchess of Ashridge hosted a small gathering where diplomats' children sat cross-legged on the floor while she taught them simple phrases in various languages. A scholarship fund in her father's name helped bright students from humble backgrounds study languages and history. Emily proudly showed anyone who'd listened the letter she'd written in Italian to a friend abroad. At dinner, Edward deliberately mispronounced a word in Russian. Clara groaned and corrected him. He pulled her close, murmuring something in French that made her blush. "You're impossible," she said. "You love me anyway." Unfortunately, yes. Society had adjusted, as society always did. The story was repeated in drawing rooms across London. Do you remember when she silenced a duke with 1 sentence? He thought her unworthy until she opened her mouth. Now he says it was the luckiest humiliation of his life. Clara smiled when she heard it. She'd walked into that Foreign Office reception with nothing but her father's gift and her own stubborn pride. She'd walked out with everything that mattered.